Time to put your galleons where your mouth is! By Tsume Yuki. Chapter 6. A Magical Monkey. Turais! The boy slammed into his back and Harry almost toppled over, only succeeding in remaining upright by grabbing hold of the nearest statue. Alice and Jane, whom he'd been walking with to the library, let out little giggles, hidden delicately behind their hands. Sirius, good morning! The younger Black was clinging to his back, legs wrapped around his waist and arms curled around his shoulder blades. It was 2 weeks into the new year. The mid-September sun hidden beneath a layer of drizzly-looking clouds. Harry had been making his way to the library to help both Alice and Jane with their defense homework before he'd suddenly been accosted. You promised you'd help me with my homework, Sirius reminded, taking a hold of his older brother's cheeks and stretching his face up into an even bigger smile than normal. An arm wrapped around his side, and Sirius found himself thrown over the shoulders he'd previously been clinging to. All right, you little limpet, I'll help. Great! Harry paused, twisting around to get a better look at the entourage that had been stood quietly behind him. The little marauders were stood before him, James Potter offering up a huge grin as Remus Lupin and Peter Pettigrew shyly shuffled about. They were such innocent kids. And if he had anything to say about it, they'd stay that way. Hi, I'm James Potter. The hand was presented before him, and Harry silently tucked Sirius against his side, much like one would hold a rugby ball. It was a comical sight, considering the younger Black brother was only a few inches shorter than his elder. Harry wouldn't mention the fact he was holding him up with wandless magic. It was far more impressive if he didn't mention that. Turais Black, Sirius's keeper, and Heir Black, in order of importance. Sirius scoffed, driving a fist into his stomach, and Harry laughed as he fell to the floor from the blow. Magic still holding Sirius in the same position, regardless of how the boy tried to wiggle free. So, what homework is causing you problems? Defense! We've got to come up with a list of spells and their uses in defense, but we don't know how to research. James had folded his arms now, frowning at the floating form of Sirius, who Harry was still grinning at. Allowing the boy to drop down again, Harry stood up, ruffling the hair of his younger brother and his best friend. I've promised Alice and Jane some help too, so you'll have to put up with each other. Okay! Even 2 weeks into his schooling, Remus Lupin's head was still spinning from all he was experiencing. He had friends. He'd made friends who laughed and joked with him. One friend had an older brother who was happy to listen to them and offer any homework help. He'd even broke off from his own friends to check up with them in the corridors to see if they were okay. Turais Black was nice to everyone, no matter the house, the age, the blood. Remus looked up to him. He was star student. He was beloved by all his teachers, by all the students. Well, almost all. Most of the older Slytherins seemed to both dislike him, but were terrified of him at the same time. Remus had carefully voiced this thought the previous night while they were in their dorm room, hoping that the younger brother of the strange older boy would have the answers to his questions. Sirius had blinked, looking blindsided by the question before a nervous laugh had left his lips. I keep forgetting none of your families really socialize. Turais is a partial mouse. Showed it off at the Parkinson ball just before he started Hogwarts. And apparently the Slytherin common room is covered in serpents. He caught them bullying someone, and you know what Turais is like. He can't stand it. I heard it from Zabini. Apparently they all came to life and tied everyone up. He threatened to throw them in the Chamber of Secrets if he caught them again. Remus had stared, then asked if the boy had really found the fabled chamber. But Sirius had shrugged, muttering that Turais always played his cards as close to his chest as possible, so no one would really know if he was bluffing or not until the time for action came. Regardless, the House of Slytherin seemed to be on its best behavior at the moment. It certainly explained the awe that filled the eyes of the younger Slytherins whenever Turais passed by. After all, he had the legendary gift of their house. But Remus didn't have much time to be thinking about that now. It was the 19th of September, after all. The full moon was tonight. James had already asked if he was okay, to which Remus had shaken his head, muttering he'd be better off going to the infirmary than staying in bed. He was walking down the corridor now, grimacing. He hated lying, especially since his new friends seemed very pleasant and accepting, but he didn't dare mention it. Evening, Remus. Remus's head snapped up, looking at the only slightly taller form of Turais Black. Ever since the older boy had taken a moment to stand near some of his year mates, Remus had been surprised to find the boy one of the shortest in his year. It didn't seem right, with all the praise for his power and intelligence, that the boy should be so short. "Hi, Turais. I take it you're off to the infirmary? You don't look so well, and it's a bit of a walk. Need a piggyback?" Remus blushed. He didn't want to admit it, but his legs were feeling quite weak with dreaded anticipation for what would happen tonight. He never got the chance to say anything, though, because Turais caught one of his arms and swung him up onto his back, and grabbing hold of the boy's shoulders was all Remus could do to not fall off. Turais happily started walking down the corridor, nodding to the students they passed until they turned into the hospital wing where they were alone. Madame Pomfrey, no doubt still at the Great Hall, finishing her dinner. "Listen, Remus, I know you're a werewolf." Remus froze in horror, staring up at the older boy who just sat him down on a bed, rubbing sheepishly at the back of his head in such a way that the messy topknot of his hair was starting to come undone. "I know it's a painful transformation, especially without a pack. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm an animagus. When I'm in that form, I can't get transformed into a werewolf, too. Do you want me to join you?" Breath still caught in his throat, Remus could only stare at the older boy. He'd read all the books on his condition, of course, and had been able to absorb the real information hidden behind the bias. A night without pack, like he'd suffered through every month, was painful. No other way to describe it. And he'd read that animagi couldn't get infected, but he'd not dared to hope, to dream that... Can you? He wasn't sure what he was asking, if it were for the boy to show him, to prove that he could really transform, or that he could stomach the thought of remaining on friendly terms with him now that he knew Remus's secret. Turais Black stood back, and then where a boy had stood before, there was now a primate creature. It had long, silky gray hair, with the signature white markings around his eyes, one tip of the right marking shaved just like the scar upon Turais' forehead. It was the size of a gorilla, but had the body structure of a thinner monkey, with a long tail for balance. And then it disappeared, reappearing but a second later. Remus had read about them before as well. A demiguise, a magical creature. "You're a demiguise?" Remus asked, awed as the large monkey transformed back into a boy. "Yep. So, want me to join you?" You don't mind that I'm a werewolf?" Remus could barely raise his voice above a whisper, praying that he wouldn't be laughed at, that this wasn't some kind of cruel joke. "Nah, you're a smart kid. I need your help to keep Sirius in line once he and James settle in enough to start pranking people." Remus snorted slightly before offering a hesitant smile to the boy who transformed back into a magical monkey. "Mr. Black!" Both boy and monkey turned to look at Madame Pomfrey, who was staring at the demiguise in awe and fury. So maybe Turais hadn't told anyone he was an animagus then. Remus woke up the next morning feeling sore in every limb, but it was nothing like the harmony of agony that usually greeted him. A blanket had been draped over him post-transformation, and the long hair of a demiguise was tickling against his forearm. Turais Black, a monkey form, had fallen asleep next to him, no doubt tired beyond all belief after staying up all night to wrestle with a werewolf. He could still remember Madame Pomfrey's face when Turais had said he wanted to spend the night, and it had taken a 15-minute argument with Professor Dumbledore before Turais finally won the chance to spend the night with a werewolf. There was a screech downstairs before the door opened. The headmaster stood before them. Remus slowly sat up, clutching the blanket around him and leaning against the slumbering form of Turais. "I don't think that's a common species of monkey," was the greeting they were given, Turais slowly waking up beside him. The large monkey's mouth stretched open in a yawn, Remus grimacing at the smell before he could stop himself. Turais laughed, changing back to human form and running a hand through his now free hair. Struck by how alike the two Black brothers were in that moment, Remus forced himself to focus, checking his body and pleased to find free of any new wounds. "That was my best transformation ever," he whispered under his breath, turning to look at Turais, no doubt gratitude shone in his eyes. A hand just ruffled his hair, the older boy laughing. "Yeah, well, they'll all be like that now. I'm not leaving you on your own, and it's always nice to stretch my animagus limbs." Remus grinned. Suddenly, the idea of someone knowing what he really was wasn't so frightening anymore. Turais would keep his secret. He protected everyone he could at school. He didn't hate anyone for their blood, even though it was well known most Blacks did so. If he could thrown off their teaching about blood, why was werewolf so much of a stretch? Throwing his arms around Turais' shoulder, Remus blushed but refused to take the gesture back. Thank you.